Stephen Ramirez monthly bird walk in San Marcos. And he continues to this day having a monthly bird walk. And even now, for the past few months, he's been streaming them. So if you go to his Facebook page, you can see what he sees. And with my hearing, sometimes I have a little trouble with the bird, but anyway, it's good. He does a great job. He graduated in 2015 from Texas State with a GIS degree, Geographic Information Systems, which is basically working with land. And he started off doing that, and that's what he still does. For a few years, he worked with SOS, which is our springs in Austin. And lately, he was working with the Texas Land Conservancy as their stewardship director. The TLC has has more than 100,000 acres under management. They have a fair number of acres that they own outright, but they have right around 125 conservation easements now. And so Stephen is out there all the time running around looking at brand new properties and old properties and places that the rest of us can't go. Gee, it's the terrible life he has, you know, there's new birds and it's a wide area. So I do feel for him for his job. He is a master naturalist when he was in the 2015 class, the cypresses. And he continues now to even lecture to the training class. And he's done that for a fair number of years. He just talked to them about 2 weeks ago. If there are a lot of master naturalists out there, or who's ever out there, most of them know who Stephen is. He and I both serve on the San Marcos River Foundation board, and he's the president. He's finishing up his second 3-year term, so he has to leave the board next year. Just to give you an idea about Stephen, he's almost been president the whole time, and once he got on the board, he was president, and he was the youngest member of the board, and he became the president, and he still is. And that's just his character and what a superb job he does. One of the things that's happened, what the River Foundation has managed to work on in the last few years under Stephen, is helping the city of San Marcos gain some properties. And these are significant properties in that they will eventually link properties the city already has with these new properties. And we're hoping to have an 18-mile loop around San Marcos. And we're kind of finishing that up and dotting I's and T's and things like that. But we are looking forward to that here. And Stephen has a lot to do that. And the final thing I would say is that Stephen has recently become engaged to a lovely woman, and we wish him all the best. Stephen?
Well, thank you for that lovely introduction, Dick. And hello, everyone. It's really nice to be here and really nice to see so many familiar faces and names. As Dick mentioned, I'm the stewardship director for Texas Land Conservancy. I've been there for about 4 years, and I'm largely responsible for monitoring and enforcing the restrictions of our conservation easements and some of the management on the preserves that we own. Today, I'll tell you a little bit more about our organization. I want to share some background context of protected land in Texas to help underscore the importance of our work. I'll quickly explain the concept of a conservation easement, but the main reason I'm here is to share some plant stuff with you. That's just judging by the name, I'm pretty sure y'all love plants. So we're gonna do a brief virtual tour, hopping around the state. Even though I know y'all are hill country based, it'll be nice to see a variety of plants around the state, some special plants, both some that are just really cool and unique and others that are very vulnerable and threatened. And so we'll bounce around the tour I've put together with that. Dick mentioned I am a Hayes Master Naturalist, and I have a background in GIS, geography, map making and such, and I've been doing the bird walks for a number of years and a lot of just kind of personal study of the Edwards Aquifer and our favorite springs. But I'm not a botanist, so I won't be the expert. I think many of you here will probably know a lot more about plants than I do, but I have been fortunate to experience a lot of cool plants even at the surface level. So I'm just kind of excited to share about some of those experiences and what I've come across and what I've learned with my time at Texas Land Conservancy. And as Lynn mentioned, feel free to put some questions in the chat. I'd love to answer your questions at the end, whether it's about conservation easements or anything interesting that I bring up and talk about on our properties or about those plants. Okay. Oops, I need to share my screen. Can y'all give me a thumbs up, or Dick or Lynn, can you give me a thumbs up?
We've got it, Stephen.
Okay, great. So this is my special presentation just for you, Special Plants Protected by Texas Land Conservancy, a virtual tour. And so a little bit more about the organization. We were founded in 1982 as the Natural Area Preservation Association, that was NAPA, and then became Texas Land Conservancy in 2007 with a name change. Our mission is to conserve natural areas in Texas and to protect the physical and ecological integrity of their wildlife habitat, native plant communities, and scenic landscapes for the benefit of present and future generations. We are 6 staff people. We have one remote person in the Dallas area, well, now we're all kind of remote for COVID, but then the rest of us are based in the Austin area. I live here in San Marcos, so neighbors to many of you, and in and out of Wimberley and Dripping Springs a lot. And we have 6 priority watersheds, the Medina, Llano, and Pedernales watersheds in the Hill Country, and then the Lower Brazos, Lower Trinity, and Neches in North and East Texas. And those are just, that's our kind of our focus service area, even though we do serve the entire state. Our outreach efforts are more tailored to those regions. We have 22 properties that we own ourselves and manage as preserves, and then 105 conservation easements on top of that. And then all that combined makes up about 112,000 acres of protected land. This is a blow-up of the map I had on there. It's just a map of those privately owned conservation easements with the green dots, and then the 22 properties that we own with the orange dots. You can see the Panhandle and Trans-Pecos and South Texas regions are pretty sparse, but then there's a lot of clusters in the Hill Country, North Texas, and East Texas. And for the context of the kind of the state of protected land in Texas, only 5% of Texas is public land, meaning it's federal, state, or local government owned. And then the remaining is 95% remaining is privately owned. As of November 2019, over 1,020,000 acres of private lands have been protected by conservation easements, and another 730,000 are protected as preserves owned by land trusts. So all of that combined makes up about 1% of private land in Texas. This is a map of the public land. So in black, we have our federal lands, such as our national parks. You can see Big Bend National Park, a big black blob in the Big Bend. And then you have things like military bases and national forests and national wildlife refuges, etc. In Red are the local government public lands. So you see a lot of red areas in the major cities like Houston, Dallas, Austin, San Antonio. So those range from just municipal public parks, or even the like Austin water quality protection lands. It's just all kind of the public ownership. And then lastly, the state-owned lands are in green. You see a big one next to the Big Bend National Park is the Big Bend Ranch State Park. You also have wildlife management areas and such. And then we'll go to a map of the privately owned conservation lands. So these are a mix of the conservation easements and then the fee simple lands owned by land trusts like Texas Land Conservancy or the Nature Conservancy being the largest one. Nature Conservancy has some major clusters in the Davis Mountains and other regions in the Trans-Pecos. You see a lot of conservation easement lands in the hill country, all along the Gulf Coast, and then kind of scattered around that North and East Texas. So a little bit to understand the importance of land protection, and with so much growth and development that we see in our state, we're putting several resources at risk. Our habitats and natural areas for ecosystem services, to have clean air and clean water, the ability to mitigate disease and reduce like pests. If you destroy habitat for certain wildlife and then you see an explosion of mice or something like that, it can spread disease, or mosquitoes, etc. Drought and flood resilience is at risk the more that we develop and pave over our lands. Working in open lands that we need for food and fiber are increasingly at risk, and our heritage and culture of rural Texas and the scenic beauty, which we're fortunate to have so much of in the hill country, but you start to see parking lots and rooftops popping up on the hilltops and everything like that, and really starts to take away from the scenic beauty. So I could spend a whole class on this topic of what a conservation easement is, but I'll do the very briefest, fastest version that I can, so that we can just talk more about cool plants and stuff. So conservation easement, what is it? It's a legal agreement that allows a land trust to restrict certain types or amounts of land use in order to protect environmental resources. That's usually in the form of like an impervious cover limit, or the amount of subdivisions, the number of structures or houses that you can put on a property. The conservation easement originally starts as an agreement between the landowner and the land trust, and everyone's going to agree that the land trust can make sure that no one can develop more than a certain amount. Why would a landowner want to protect their land with a conservation easement? A major benefit is seeing protection, but also retaining ownership of the land simultaneously. Donating a conservation easement will provide special income tax deductions. It can help with estate planning and make some of those really difficult choices for your loved ones so they don't have to. If you want to create a legacy of land stewardship and protection, just have that peace of mind that when you're gone, the beautiful land that you know and love will remain in an undeveloped state. And the working with landowners to put conservation easements on their land, that's the bulk of what Texas Land Conservancy does. Okay, We're going to dive into the virtual tour, and I hope I'm not rushing through my presentation too quickly, but like I said, I'm not a botanist, but I've had some really interesting and fun experiences on our lands, on our fee-owned preserves and our conservation easements. So the first one is our hibiscus tract in Houston County. So I have on the map there, this is in the Neches watershed, north of Huntsville, kind of one of the closer cities that you might recognize. And it's a 30-acre preserve that we own, the Texas Land Conservancy, and it's all because of this federally and state threatened plant, the Neches River rose mallow, Hibiscus daisy calyx. This is a globally ranked critically imperiled species. It occurs at the edge of woodlands in intermittently inundated soils. It has a very beautiful showy flower like most hibiscus plants. This one has a unique leaf shape, and the pod where the flower comes from, and this is where my lack of botany training is really going to shine. One way that they identified this over some of the other species is it lacks any of the hairs on like the bulb before it blooms. And so we have one of the most pure stands and like populations of this plant on our preserve. And we've been working with the Fish and Wildlife Service primarily to do some management. And they also bring in Texas Parks and Wildlife, and there's another branch. I think it's like, it's not the Forest Service, but it's like a Fish and Wildlife forest management branch. When I first came on board in 2016 and went out there for the first time, I met with those folks and we did a survey and counted every single plant, and that was kind of the beginning of me understanding more about its life history and what we're going to need to do to make sure that it's going to continue to thrive. So I'll go to the next slide. This was, the map on top was a kind of informal survey that I did in 2019, and I logged a point of all the plants, which are those red dots. And you can see the 30-acre boundary is the orange line on the edges. You can't see the whole thing, but there's just a pond, a small tank, and then a drainage that flows through the center of the property. And that's where the plants occur. So those red dots are everywhere I found plants, and then there's a ditch on the highway where there's a small cluster of plants as well. So they seem to be pretty resilient, especially like if they're occurring in the drainage ditch, which gets shredded regularly. They seem to like that. But it's always a nerve-wracking thing to think about bringing in a shredder and mowing over a very threatened species, a very at-risk species with such small populations. But you can see that there's an aerial image on the bottom right, and that was the work we did late fall of 2019 with one of those forestry mulchers, Hydroax equipment that the Fish and Wildlife Service brought out, and we kind of carved the border of that drainage, and we're working on basically woody plant control and doing very selective herbicide treatment in the interior of that. But it's definitely a challenge for Texas Land Conservancy to manage the acres that we have, and so we definitely try and put these special cases, these special properties at the priority list, but it's pretty drastic how much woody growth there has been since this property was purchased in early 2000s. So COVID really put a hamper on this management, unfortunately. So I'm itching to get back out there and see how things are looking. But it's pretty cool to go out there and see such a special plant that lives in such a restricted area. Okay, we'll move on to the next property. So this is what we call Morningside. It's in Grimes County. Also, no, I didn't update the map on that one. But it's a little bit south of where that red arrow is that I had from the last slide. And so we have another stewardship director. We kind of split our properties. So this isn't one I'm intimately familiar with, but I know we have this plant out here, but I've never been there. So the Texas meadow rue is this very inconspicuous plant that grows near the ground. It's a global rank of imperiled, the G2, with the asterisk of being questionable taxonomy. So I guess I'm not sure if it really deserves to be its own species or something like that. But it's state ranked as imperiled as well. And this property, Morningside, is, they also suspect there to be Navasota lady tresses out there. They've seen a number of other orchids and highly suspect that they're out there, but I don't think they've actually been observed. But the landowners have been trying really hard to manage the land to benefit the at-risk species. So I think this photo in the bottom right was from a burn they did this spring. And it's a really good sign because the original grantor, the original donor of this conservation easement, which is about 120 acres, she passed away, and I guess it was her daughter inherited the land, but she's been willing and excited to continue the legacy they've created out there and make sure they're doing the right things for the habitat. Okay, so that's Morningside. Next up, we're going to go to Wood County. This is in Northeast Texas at our Soutendike Bog, where this plant's not critically impaired or anything, but it's just a neat one and fun for me to get to experience. The pale pitcher plant, a carnivorous species. So this small conservation easement surrounds a pond that has a bunch of seeps from this small drainage. And the pale pitcher plant, also known as yellow trumpets, they inhabit the wetland margins of that pond. And so they're considered near threatened. So it's just kind of one step above being okay. And the carnivorous plants, as I'm sure you all know, they have different methods of trapping insects in order to dissolve them and get nutrients from them. And so these pretty classic, the pitcher plant shape and style with that tall tube and the little flap on top, but they have either rotten or sweet smell to attract bugs, and then the hairs that will make it so they can't escape, and then they kind of get dissolved and digested. It's just really cool. So here's the small property. You can see the pond on the map, and there's just a drainage that comes in from the bottom left of that map to the pond, which is just a man-made pond and dammed up. They've had beaver and alligators in that pond, which is fun for them. The landowners are really enthusiastic about all the neat plants they have out there. Um, and then the last time I was out there last year, the beaver decided to create a new pond below this dam, um, and he clogged up one little drainage and created a really nice big pond. And I'm not sure what the landowners wanted to do at that point. Um, it's always fun to see the beavers create habitat, um, and ideally they can um, cohabitate with those uses. And then the bottom left is just a photo of that pond. And so it's just the upstream boundaries, the upstream periphery of that pond is where the pitcher plant habitat is. Okay, now we're going to head south near the coast onto the Nigbor Ranch. This is in Brazoria County along the Brazos River. But generally, I wanted to talk about the Columbia Bottomlands region and the old growth bottomland forests that comprise it. So this photo is a massive southern live oak. I have a 6'5" wingspan, and so I've got my arms up there in that photo. If you can barely see me, but it's just a gargantuan tree and really inspiring to see in person. And altogether, Texas Land Conservancy has about 3,800 acres in this Columbia Bottomlands region. This Nigbor Ranch is a conservation easement. It's 430 acres. And the Columbia Bottomlands are an important stopover for migrating birds that are coming across the Gulf of Mexico. And the beautiful and ancient bottomland forest. There's another tree, just kind of typical of what you might see walking around there. And then a map of this long, slender tract. There's the Brazos River on the left side, and then there's a Oyster Creek cuts through the middle of it. And I learned that at one point, Oyster Creek was the Brazos River, and then it made this major shift. Or so that's what I think I learned. And some of our work in this region of those 3,800 acres are restoration mitigation banks. And so we're not always just conserving existing land. We're working with projects that are designed to restore habitat. Okay, now we're going to go all the way north into Grayson County. You can see the dot that I've highlighted on the map, right on the edge of Texas on the Red River. And this is our North Texas Wildflower Prairie. It's a really small conservation easement, but the special thing about it is the part of it that was it's a small tall grass prairie remnant. It was never plowed or grazed. And they said they set it aside in 1926 and then just used it for hay, to cultivate hay. Meaning all of they have like long spike tridents, big blue stem, little blue stem, Indian grass. That's what their hay was made of. And so I imagine that was extremely rich in protein and such. And one of my favorite plants out there is the rattlesnake master. Just such a unique looking plant. The species name is something with yucca in it because the leaves, the lower leaves of this plant are kind of barbed and resemble yucca plants. And it's related to, it's an Eringo, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, is the genus. So there's like the more common purple Eringo plants that it's related to, and you can see the resemblance in those flower heads. The again, this property was a case where we've seen the original donor of the conservation easement passed away. The heirs of that donor decided to sell the land. So we have new landowners who are trying to learn the ropes on how to best take care of that prairie remnant. And just some basic photos of, I think the bottom left photo has, I think, a bunch of Indian grass, and then looks like little blue stem and some rattlesnake master in the foreground, and the Indian paintbrush flower in red, all in the top right photo. So I haven't spent too much time out there. Usually when I'm doing trips to North Texas, I was trying to cram a lot into a short amount of time. But now we have our North Texas program director who's based in the Dallas area. So she's going to be able to dedicate a lot more time to properties like that. Okay, last week on Friday, I was out here in Kerr County at our Los Rincones Preserve. This is a TLC-owned preserve. It's 137 acres with golden cheek warblers and the towbush fishhook cactus. Both are federal and state listed endangered species. You can see the cactus in the top left image with the kind of the primary needle spikes having the fishhook shape. There was a healthy population, and then sometime in the early 2000s, there was like a caretaker mishap that damaged a large portion of it, unfortunately. And this land was donated to us when the landowner passed away. It was deeded to us in their will, and we've been hanging on to it since that time. Don't remember the exact date, but it's typical Balcones canyonlands habitat that we know in the hill country. Lots of ash juniper, and we have 6 oak species on this property. We have Texas red oak, plateau live oak, lacy oak, which are my favorite, and then blackjack oak, shin oak, and post oak. So it has really nice mixed forest, and I like to get out there in the spring to find the golden cheek warblers, and we usually catch them out there. But I wasn't able to get out there this spring because of COVID, so I just started getting back out in the field, and that's when I made it out there last week. The name Los Rincones, it translates to like kind of corners or pockets. And if you look at the topo map, there's several fingers branching from those 2 main canyon stems. And so it's just each one of those little drainages that comes up from the steep canyon. That's the namesake of the property, Los Rincones. And the photo on the top left is the most dramatic kind of grotto area on the property. I was doing some kind of live stream Instagram stories on Friday, and I was planning to drop down into this canyon and hike up into this grotto area. And right before I got to the bottom of the drainage, I heard a haunting scream, and I was convincing myself it was a mountain lion, but later realized it was just a gray fox. But I have some video footage. It's like my own Blair Witch project of me recording the sound and like scrambling up this hillside and first trying to track down where the sound's coming from, and then everything going quiet, and then being concerned that I was about to be stalked by a mountain lion. So it was a fun experience after my nerves settled down. Okay. Now we are heading back over to East Texas to Catahoula Forest in Jasper County. This was our first protected property in 1984. It was purchased by a number of donors. It's 101 acres, and you can see they have they put up a memorial for all the donors, and you can see, I imagine, a bunch of those people in the photo were some of those donors. But this is a longleaf pine forest stand. It's surrounded by the Angelina National Forest, and the longleaf pine ecosystem provides critical habitat for 29 threatened and endangered species like the red cockaded woodpeckers, and nearly 900 different plant species occur in longleaf forests. So they're highly dependent on fire, but they're extremely rich in diversity when they're either managed properly or allowed to function how they were evolved. So here's a photo of Ned Fritz, the founder of the Natural Area Preservation Association, with that same sign that the folks were lined up with. And then the photo on the right is one of our current board members. He got to go out there with Ellen as one of our other stewardship directors, kind of recreating the photo of Ned Fritz. You can see we have an MOU partnership with the Forest Service. So we're fortunate that they get to burn this property and help us manage it. So you can just see the difference in understory with the photo on the left with Ned Fritz and the photo on the right. I mean, I'm not a forester, so I imagine that fuel load on the image on the right is still, might be getting ripe for a burn, but definitely much better than the image on the left. And then just a simple map showing the boundary. There is a creek that goes through it, but a lot of forest land surrounding this property. So it's just kind of, it's essentially part of the National Forest System because they're able to manage it all together. Okay, now I'm going to take you to Dallas, Texas, in Dallas County, where we have our Oak Cliff Nature Preserve. This is 120 acres in urban Dallas, owned by Texas Land Conservancy. It's sort of our flagship nature preserve. We have thousands of visitors every year, and that's mainly because of our 8 miles of hike and mountain bike trails. And our good friend, Minette Marr from the LBJ Wildflower Center, she told me about this plant that she found out there in one of the meadows, this glandular blazing star. And I wasn't sure if Minette was going to be attending this session or not, but she told me she visits family up there regularly and gets to go to that preserve, so pretty cool connection for us. And this is her iNaturalist observation that I have a photo of, and it's only known from 4 or 5 counties, is what I believe. And I think this plant was described in 2001 or so, and it's globally ranked G3 vulnerable species. So pretty cool to have a unique plant like that in a really dense urban environment. And we're very fortunate to have the park itself, but then to have stuff like this occurring on the property are um, reassuring, especially because we definitely have major management challenges with that habitat. Lots of invasive species, a lot of woody growth. I have a map. Um, if it was zoomed out a little bit more, you'd really get a sense of how much urban environment surrounds the Oak Cliff region. And, but also on that map are the expansive network of trails. Um, and then the photo on the bottom right is an example of where you'd find that um, glandular blazing star in some of the meadows that are remaining there. We have some work to do to fight back some of that woody encroachment, but there's still a couple nice open areas like that to find plants like that. Okay. Okay, now we're heading a little bit closer to home, a little bit more familiar for us. This is the Gunsight Mountain Preserve in Bandera County. This is a conservation easement. It's 502 acres and has a lot of great plants, but in particular, the American smoke tree. And this is another one that's not particularly threatened, but it's just one of those rare, uncommon species. If you look at the map in the bottom right, it has just a bunch of tiny pockets of occurrence in many different states. And I just find that so interesting. And so whether you're in Arkansas or Alabama or Tennessee, you might be finding these, special little pockets that this plant occurs. And it's popular in the nursery business, I think. So I think a lot of people do buy and plant these, which is cool. But it's really nice to be able to find them in their native habitat. I mentioned they're not extremely threatened. They're ranked G4, which means apparently secure. And the hazy smoke appearance of the smoke tree comes from the spent flower clusters. They're kind of this wispy pinkish color, and they almost make you feel like you're losing your eyesight and everything just sort of blurry. But then they also have a beautiful fall foliage color from yellow to red. So this is a drone image I captured of the Gunsight Mountain Preserve. There's a nice stream that runs through the middle of it, and when I was out there, the first year I made it out there was just like peak fall colors. So it was exceptionally beautiful. If you look on the map, you can see there's a lot of ash juniper oak forest in the southern portion. So you can be sure that there's golden cheek warblers out there. Got a lot of madrone trees. And I think these steep hill country canyons like to hide a lot of really cool plants. All right, and even closer to home, we have the Eagle Rock Ranch here in Hayes County. This is an 88-acre conservation easement that we have on Cypress Creek, just below Jacob's Well. It has a considerable amount of road frontage, which is nice just for the scenic aspect. In Wood Creek, which we know is ripe for development. And so along the riparian areas, we have Texas fescue. I didn't check the status of that species. I know it has a pretty limited range, but I'm not sure how they rank on the vulnerability scale. So that's Texas fescue on the left, and then the Texas barberry on the right, which is a close relative of agarita. And the Texas barberry is one of the plants that I basically look for anywhere I go in the hill country. Just it's easy to identify with its holly-like leaves, and agarita with its 3 leaflets is very easy to identify, and then the Texas barberry has 5 leaflets, or 5 to 7 leaflets. So it's easy to spot, just like an agarita. Like if you see anything that looks like an agarita, you can like quickly glance at it and then easily tell if it's Texas barberry or not. And if you haven't seen these, I know that they're easy to find at the Jacob's Well preserve that the Hays County owns now. If you just walk along their trails, you should be able to spot those. This is just a scenic photo from the creek there. So that's all Jacob's Well source waters, and it's less than a mile downstream. It's right along. This property starts on Jacob's Well Road, and I like I'm not the biggest fan of dams, but it's definitely a scenic spot with the cliffside there and that bare grass kind of hanging over the cliffs there. And if you haven't seen the Texas fescue and you're in San Marcos, we found a small population in the Purgatory Park green space along the trail that runs along Purgatory Creek. So kind of cool to see those in our backyard. Okay, that's the end of the tour, and I want to plug your opportunity to support Texas Land Conservancy. We have memberships that are $35 for individuals and $60 for families. Memberships receive advanced and discounted registration for private land hikes and events and our biannual Texas Forever magazine newsletter. We haven't been able to do the private lands hikes this year, obviously. And so in its place, we launched a Texas Nature Trivia online. So if you're already savvy with Zoom, I think you're savvy enough to participate in our Texas Nature Trivia, which have been a whole lot of fun. Our next one is going to be on September 15th, and we always have some good plant questions mixed in there, so all you plant lovers will love that. It's free. We require a reservation that we post on our website and all of our emails and everything. So if you just want to keep up with TLC, you can go to our website, texaslandconservancy.org/get-updates, or just keep in touch with our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter accounts. And if you have any questions when this is over, you can contact me, Stephen, at texaslandconservancy.org. And I am ready to take your chat questions now. And I hope you guys have some. If you haven't thought of any already, take a moment to do so.
So Stephen, this is Betsy. I'm going to ask the questions that are in the chat for you, and just so everybody can hear those. And So the first question up is from Vanita, and she's very interested in how to get one of those t-shirts that you're wearing.
Well, let me show off the shirt a little bit more. This is the Protect the Nature of Texas with the Texas horned lizard. And so the Texas horned lizard is our mascot. We named him Lyle, and he has a little kind of desert landscape image on him. So go to our website, conservancy.org, and you can pick those up from our shop, and we'll send you one.
Great. I have some barkers in the background, so I'm sorry about that. The next, there's a comment and a question from Sarah Carlisle. She said her great-great-great-grandfather, somewhere in the mid-1700s, was a cartographer. And that was just a comment from her. I believe you were showing the hibiscus there, that beautiful hibiscus, and she wanted to know, why do you shred around the hibiscus?
So there's some folks who have some, they've raised the hibiscus plants in a nursery, and they've sort of studied what it likes. And so we know it's okay to have some disturbance. And our main problem we have is just the woody encroachment and overcrowding. So I mentioned that it was, we know in theory that it would respond well to shredding, but at the same time, we're so cautious to do things that would harm the plant that we don't just want to shred the whole habitat. And so we created a buffer for ourselves with that perimeter mulching work that we did. And then it was the plan to do a more hand selective woody plant treatment. And so yeah, the main thing we're battling is just the woody plants. And the hibiscus, it's woody, but it'll here's my lack of botany and plants coming in again. It's perennial, so like it'll grow and then die off, but the roots and everything are still there, and it'll sprout again next year. And so cutting it off just 2 or 3 inches above the ground is actually helpful for it.
A bit like lantana, perhaps.
Perhaps.
Okay. I had a question for you, Stephen. I was curious about the tree that you showed at the Columbia Bottomlands.
Mm-hmm.
If you know what an estimated age on that large tree.
I don't. So another fun note about the Columbia Bottomlands is in the San Bernard National Wildlife Refuge, they have the largest oak tree in Texas. I think it was in the early 2000s they found it, and it beat out the Goose Island State Park tree. And I think, I know the Goose Island tree is like 800 to 1200 years old or something in that range. The San Bernard tree seemed to be a fair bit younger, in the 200 to 400 year range. So that would be my guess for that large tree that I was standing next to.
Okay. Another question from Charles. Are there any areas near Georgetown that need invasive tree or shrub removal? That you know about?
I could look into it. If George wants to shoot me an email, give me a call. And I assume he's looking for volunteer opportunities, or maybe he specializes in that work.
Yeah, that could be. So Charles, if you if you need an email or you want to drop another message in, feel free to do so. We'll grab that up before we tidy up here. Another question, or just a comment about the excellent presentation, Stephen, that you made. That's very nice. And also from Lance Jones, the same. And then from Nancy, do you have any bracted twist flower plants on any of the properties?
I don't think so. Some of my favorite properties are the very kind of steep cliff hill country habitats, where I find things like butterfly wand or columbine, and just these very resilient plants that grow in these harsh conditions. But I don't think we have any bracted twist flower.
Okay, another question. What highway is near the hibiscus tract in Houston County? I believe it's Houston County, not near Houston, Texas, but in Houston County, right?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so it's, I don't know the number. It's a small road, but it's on the southwest side of the town of Lovelady. So there's a road that goes from there to maybe 5 or 10 miles towards a prison, and that would be the road.
Okay. And from Donna, she's thanking you and also would love to do a field trip. Is there any field trip planned to the bog?
No, so we've, most of our private land hikes have been in the Austin region, just because of the difficulty and challenge of, the logistics. Now that we have a North Texas program director, we can expand that into that region, but I'm not sure. It's still this, the Soutendike Bog is like way in Northeast Texas, so we haven't really considered going out there. So I think that's all I can say at that point.
Okay. So from Chris, she's asking, are you looking at targeting certain property based on the ability to provide connectivity among isolated tracts?
So we definitely would like to see more connectivity, and I've been working on a program to pursue conservation that touches existing conservation that we have, basically calling all the neighbors and looking for opportunities, see if they'd be willing to protect their land. And it also, we have like a ranking scorecard on whether or not to pursue projects, and adjacency to existing conservation lands scores very highly. So I think the main answer is it's kind of a program I've been wanting to put more focus into reaching out to neighboring properties, because I think that is essential to creating a sort of landscape scale conservation, kind of like what you see with the Nature Conservancy in the Davis Mountains or the Devil's River.
And just another comment, Stephen, about from Charles about looking for opportunities to volunteer for removing invasive trees and shrubs. That is his add-on comment to his previous question.
Okay.
Do you have any advice on that? I think you must be near Georgetown or somewhere in that area. So if there's anything that you can recommend there, that would be probably related to his question.
Okay. Yeah, nothing comes to mind on any of the projects we have. But again, if I get his information or if he contacts me, I can do a little more digging into
his email is in the chat if you would take a look there if you want to. And when we at the end of this recording, we'll also have the chat comments will be recorded as well.
Okay, I see it now. Thank you everyone for the kind words. It's a little bit challenging to do these presentations staring at screens. I'd rather do it in person, but I appreciate everyone's interest. And unless there are any other questions.
Lynn has her hand up, and Lynn, I'm assuming you'd like to make a final comment. Feel free to unmute yourself. There you go.
Okay, I think I'm good. I would like to thank everybody who tuned in and hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thanks to Betsy, Chris, and Tanya for making this happen. Thanks to Dick for the great introduction. And Stephen, thank you so much. This was a wonderful presentation and we are very grateful.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Lynn.
And with that, unless
right.
anyone has anything else, I think it's good night.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks everybody.
Again.
Thanks for a wonderful talk. Really enjoyed it.
Great, thank you.
Okay, if you want, I can cut everybody off.
I don't want to leave.
I'll go ahead and close out, Chris. I'll close it out. That way I can capture this recording. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.